morning, Professor Stolz.
Morning.
Thank you so much for being here today at the Graduate Institute. You are a distinguished scholar in the sociology of religion, holding multiple esteemed positions at the University of Lausanne. You are the director and professor at the Institute of Social Sciences of Religions within the Faculty of Theology and Sciences of Religions. You are also a professor at the Life Center, the Interdisciplinary Research Center of Life Course and Vulnerabilities in the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences. Your academic journey is also quite remarkable. You studied economical sociology, sociology of religion, and philosophy at the universities of Zurich and Bielefeld. Later, you got your PhD from the University of Zurich. You further enriched your academic experience with postdoctoral research in Paris, Mannheim, and Ann Arbor. Since early 2000s, you have been a full professor at the University of Lausanne. Your work uniquely combines theoretical and empirical research, aiming to develop innovative frameworks, such as the general theory of social games, which we will talk about in detail today, and a theory of religious secular competition. Your empirical studies have explored topics including evangelicalism, secularization, and resacralization, comparisons of local religious groups, Islamophobia, as well as secular or atheistic beliefs. We are honored to have you with us today and look forward to delving into your insights on the general theory of social games that you developed.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, to start with, could you briefly define the social games in the context of your research and its link to religion?
Mm-hmm. So, social games, or the theory of social games, is a theory that I have come up with in my teaching. I had to teach for 22 years now the same course and sociology of religion, and had to introduce students from all kinds of backgrounds to sociology. So I had to have something that gives them very quickly a general idea of what sociology and sociological theory is. And so over the years, without me really planning it, this social games approach came to the fore. And the basic idea is very simple. It starts out by looking at simple games like board games, like chess, and looking at what elements do we really, what are the elements that you really need to have such a game. And in my view, what you have is you always have actors as players who interact in situations. And then you have three things that are important. You have resources and goals, or means and goals. You want to win with your moves. You have rules and sanctions. And you have representations and meanings, or signs and meanings. You could also say, the queen. There's one figure that is a queen, and that creates outcomes. So this structure, this basic structure that we find in chess, or we would find it in rock, paper, scissors, or in any game, is, in my view, the general structure of the social. So we would find the same thing in what we have here now, an interview, and we could see, well, we are actors as players. Suddenly I am the person who is interviewed, and you are the interviewer, and we interact in this situation. There's other people around which are not seen right now by the viewers. There's a goal with our means, but there's also rules and sanctions, and there's representations of meanings, the things we talk about. So that's the basic idea, and in my view, that is an idea that is very general and that might be a step forward from other general ideas, like if you talk about Bourdieu or Giddens or Luhmann, Parsons, all these grand theories. I think they have their value, but their starting point might not be as simple, and it might go as far as this idea, at least in my view.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, thank you. And so what is specifically, like, how do you connect this grand theory of social games to religion?
Yes. So once you have religion, and religion I would define as an practice and beliefs that allude to some super empirical or supernatural entity, like a god or a spirit. Well, if you have that and you think about social games, you come to the idea that these are games with a supernatural player. So we all play a game. If you're a congregation, you play a game, but one of the players is different. We can't see him, but he is there. So we have to interact with this player. We can talk to him, pray, or we can give him something to make him, be benevolent to us. That would be sacrifice. We can say good things about him. We would also want to know what he's saying to us. So we need priests. They will tell us what that goes. So you see, it's a kind of a supernatural. So then you come to the ideas, well, what kinds of games can you set up to make those supernatural players do something? Or so we're convinced that these supernatural players are there. And that leads us to all kinds of analysis. For example, how do Pentecostals create their miracles? How to make their supernatural player produce healings? Or how do Catholics do it? How do Scientologists do it?
And it's very interesting about the healing miracles. Can you explain a bit more, like how, while seeing those healing miracles, which I believe you have witnessed and research about, right? How do you see this happening, and how do you analyze it through your theoretical framework?
Yeah, so I've worked on Pentecostals and Pentecostal miracles and healings, and Pentecostals are a Christian branch of Christianity from starting in the beginning of 20th century, with a special emphasis on the Holy Spirit. So they say that one can experience the Holy Spirit still today, and the Holy Spirit creates all kinds of miracles. So he will permit us to speak in tongues. So he speaks through us in a language one doesn't understand. He permits healing people. He permits prophesying and words of knowledge. Suddenly I know something that supernaturally that normally I couldn't know. Pentecostalism has been so successful worldwide. So now about 20% of Christians worldwide are Pentecostals. It has probably been so successful because of that, because people see miracles happening. And so when I analyzed, made a case study of that, I asked myself, well, what kind of game do they play, and how have they set up the game so the game would create miracles and healings even if there's nothing supernatural happening. So there's an assumption there, a sociological assumption. And what are those techniques? Well, there's some, I won't go say everything, but one of them is that the orator puts the audience in some kind of mild trance, like you would do in hypnosis, which makes that people might feel their body differently. You might feel your body to be warm or different size or tingling on them. And then the orator will say, right now, we will have a large room with many people, and we'll say, right now I see somebody, I know that somebody's healed there from a headache because of a car accident and a terrible headache, and right now it's healed. It's completely gone. And if it's you, so come forward and testify. And right there, there's somebody who is healed from a bad knee, so your knee. And so he goes through all kinds of illnesses and supernaturally knows that these healings happen. And afterwards, these people come forward and testify. And what happens, of course, is this is a game where the people if you have many people and you have many illnesses, everybody asks themselves, is this me? Is this? And some people will think, oh, this is me, and will interpret their bodily experiences as healings. Mm-hmm. There's also the idea in Pentecostals that if you only believe enough, you can claim your healing. So you can go forward, and by claiming it, you can be actually healed. And so they come forward, and then you have, in that way, you have two miracles, really. One is that the healer, the orator, knew that the healing happened, and the second one is that there's the actual healing. Then you can explain, in some orators are they have much more important miracles than others. Well, that depends partly on their charisma. If they have stronger charisma, people will be more convinced. They have larger audiences. If you have larger audiences, you can select the more influenceable people much better. So if you look at Benny Hinn, for example, very large audience, very incredible healings and miracles. So that would be one example where you have a game that is played by the orator and the public together, because the public, of course, they're Pentecostals. They know how this works. They know that not everybody's healed that comes forward. They will say, it's always the same people. They go, but they're also convinced that sometimes it's real healings. Mm-hmm. That's one example.
It's interesting. It makes me think of the part where you talk about game languages. You have to understand and know the game and also know the rules to be able to really play or be part of it. Do you think, even though you don't really know the rules, can you just be like engaged in the flow of such a healing or miracle when you're just an audience from outside? Mm-hmm. How also did you feel about it while being an observer?
Right. Have I been healed? No, I have not. I hoped that I could get some benefit from it, but it's so you're absolutely right. If you want to become a Pentecostal, and that's true for all social games normally. So if you want to become an academic, you have to spend long years learning how the academic game works, and you will not immediately understand what actually the goals are and what the means are. Students normally don't understand that academics want publications in important journals. That's what they want. You have to learn that. And to the Pentecostals, you can go to some of these events and get caught up. So you can fall into trance. So I have had an assistant who came with me, not a Pentecostal at all, and who suddenly started laughing uncontrollably during the framework, and then suddenly she sees a small elderly woman beside her who touches her, and she said she felt like her body became all liquid, and she had to go out, and she was completely shaken by the experience. So she had an altered states of consciousness that didn't have any effect afterwards. Mm-hmm. She didn't become a believer, but the game had done that to her. To become a Pentecostal, it needs much longer time of learning the game, the rules, the representations, and making the step of saying, well, yes, I want to be part of that game for a longer time.
Okay, so it's a learning journey, let's say.
Yes. Which also, so the Pentecostals, evangelicals in general, they have the idea of a conversion. So at one specific point in time, you will give your life to Jesus, and you will repent all your sins, and then you lead basically a perfect life, if possible. And Pentecostals and evangelicals talk about this experience. At one point in time they had this conversion. Mm-hmm. But from a sociological point of view and from social game theory, this conversion is symbolizes the socialization process. Mm. So basically it takes a long time normally, but you sort of make it known in one point in time and then talk about it.
And how do you perceive this socialization? Because, for example, there are authors such as Bourdieu who have their own definition of socialization.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the same perspective, or is it different in the case of religion and the game theory?
Yeah, so what I say in social game theory is in many respects similar to what Bourdieu says. So in Bourdieu also you have these fields and positions and competition, and the game goal would be l'enjeu in Bourdieu. What is different, I think, is that in Bourdieu you have the habitus, which means that you are very strongly influenced by your group, and which is either dominated or not, and the individual liberty is not seen very strongly as very important. There's also Marxist elements in Bourdieu, and Bourdieu has not really a very clear link to empirical work. Perhaps we'll come to that, and I think that social game theory has more to give with the link to empirical stuff. But I mean, back to socialization, I think I would agree with Bourdieu that socialization is very important. I would differ probably in saying that you can be socialized also as an adult, also as an elderly people. You know, we have to go into new games all the time and learn all the time.
And it's interesting the point you touched about the empirical theory, or empirical, research that you can do. In your paper, you talk about the difference between your social game theory and other authors' social game theory, that yours is also applicable and you can do empirical research. Can you talk a bit more about it and how you see this difference?
Yes, it's. I mean, this is one thing that has always been criticized with grand theories. You know, in sociology we have these so-called grand theories, and when you say grand theory, you say it's not so good. So you say Parsons and Luhmann and Giddens, and people say, well, these are big theoretical schemes that cannot really be used empirically. And often one has to say it's true. So Parsons, for example, there's no really studies, empirical studies that really use it, or Luhmann or Habermas. It's better with Bourdieu, although the link is not so clear in my view. And rational choice theories, they have a lot of empirical stuff, but there's other problems there, I would say. So here in the social game theory, the idea is that there's a clearer link to qualitative and quantitative research. What's the link to qualitative research? Well, if you don't know a game, you have a game that it's unknown to you. You have to be like an anthropologist, and let's say you go and study 1%ers, like these bikers, Hells Angels, vandals, moguls, these, you don't know about them, you want to study them. Well, you look at them as a game, and then you go through the questions. So what are the players, like the player roles? How should you be as a biker? What are the goals of bikers? Goals of bikers, for example, is to have respect. One of the most important things as a bike, to have one's bike. That's the goals. You ask what are the means, so means and goals. You ask what are the rules and sanctions. Many rules and sanctions among bikers. Never touch the patch of a biker. That's a no-go, absolutely. There's representations and meanings. And what does the patch of the biker actually mean? What does that signify? So you go through those questions like a heuristic, and very quickly you find what that game is about. It's similar to, I don't know if you know grounded theory, so Glaser, Strauss, they have a kind of a heuristic of that kind, which is the conditions, strategies, and effects. But they miss many important things, for example, the rules and the sanctions, and they miss the goals. So I think so this is the heuristic for qualitative research. And then quantitative research, once you know the game, you will want to measure things and correlate them. Well, if you have social games, you know exactly what to measure. It's, again, these different points. So, you know, rules are rules, they're yes or no. Resources of actors, you know, how intelligent are people, what is their status, what is their religiosity. You measure them and can therefore create theories that can be tested quantitatively. In that sense, I would say it's preferable to rational choice theories that have utility, for example, but utility can't really be measured, or it's very hard. So if you think about those elements of games, you actually see them and can measure them.
And do you think that, I mean, compared to those other theories, how do you see the fact of having, you know, like specific framework with rules, sanctions, etc. But are you still thinking of how to not essentialize a particular group or a particular subgroup of this religion, for example?
Right. So this is the question about essentializing. I'm not very convinced by that critique. So very often people in anthropology or qualitative sociology say, oh, you're essentializing the group, or you're essentializing this institution. And I'm never quite sure what they actually mean. So I think if sociologists or anthropologists talk about groups, they have to assume that these groups actually exist and bring some data to show that they exist. Of course, those groups are always constructed. If you take a game, the game only exists if people think the game exists. Right? If my partner doesn't believe that we're playing a game, I can't play the game. True for everything we do. If we stop believing in the value of our money, it's no money anymore. And if people stop believing in the validity of your diploma, then it's not a diploma anymore, right? So in a way, the fact that things are constructed is just common sense, theoretically. And so I don't know really you might not describe well the game, but I'm not quite sure what the essentializing really criticizes.
Mm. And it's also, you talked about being socially constructed, of course, but in your paper you talk also about the fact that it's real and socially constructed.
Yes. So I can explain it with money. So money is socially constructed because it only works if we believe. So that's why confidence is so important. You know, that's why we. As soon as there's a crisis, all politicians go on and say everything is fine, you know, there's no problem at all. Because once people have fear and lose confidence, then suddenly the money loses its value, right? So there we see that it's constructed. At the same time, it's real money, so you can really buy something with it. So there's always these two. That's two things that are always true about all social games, be it games for fun or social games that we play everywhere.
Mm-hmm. And it makes me think of prestigious religious institutions who also lost the trust of the believers, right?
Right.
In that sense, I mean, you talked about money, but when we talk about a specific case in religion, for example, being in our contemporary, world.
Yeah. So of course, if we go to religion, sort of the equivalent of the money would be the reality of their gods and their salvation goods. You know, this is what they deal with. We would be interested in a religion if we thought that this God really existed and he could help me with quite a lot of things that I need. And of course, if I see, for example, the priests or not behaving as they should, or if I see that the group that believed in something lost its war, I could stop believing in that kind of God, and that would be a problem, right? So there's many examples of that kind. There's also counterexamples. So sometimes you see that a prophet will say that the end of the world is near, and then, like the Jehovah's Witnesses in 1914, and then the world continues to come. But no problem for the group. So some people go away, but many other people will say, perhaps that was the wrong date, or they will reinterpret. So Jehovah's Witnesses reinterpreted it and said, well, it happened, but invisibly. And that's one of the ways that religions can have been able to continue to have believers, even though many times expectations have failed.
And so it also makes me think of the importance of taking into account religion within politics, right? Which have long been intertwined. And how do you conceptualize this relationship between those two spheres? Mm-hmm. And how does this connection shape the dynamics of religious games?
Mm-hmm. So in the general theory of social games, politics would be when we decide about the rules. So there's in every game potentially politics. If we have the game of chess and you say, I think this rule is not good, we should change it. And then I say, well, but then we also have to change that other rule. And then we start discussing it, and then we take a vote. That would be the game politics of our chess, right? And or if I had a friend and he would vote with me, and so I would vote against the other, then say, well, now the majority has won, and we'll do it this way. That would be politics. So. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, you have in every religious group's internal politics. But then when we talk about the state and religion, we of course have again a different, we see sort of a political, societal game system and a religious societal game. And we can think about how the regulation of religion has effects on that. There's many studies on that. One of the most prominent being recently that American scholars said that religion would flourish if only one left what they called the religious market free. And they said, well, you see, the US is so religious because they have a free religious market. Europe is so without belief because they have regulation, they have state churches and so on. And they said, just open your markets in Europe and you will see how religion will flourish. And that's completely wrong empirically, because we see that the United States now has also secularization, and that the United States is actually empirically so religious in part because it has areas that are very religious, and those are actually, like in the South, quite closed areas. So religion often is stronger when you have monopolies or relative monopolies, where people of like-minded people are together and can strengthen each other's belief.
So does that mean that, for example, a nation state which is affiliated with a religion which is not, let's say, laïc, is there like a different dynamic, or would you say that it has the monopoly on the religion, and it means that all the game rules are also dominate, or like people have the monopoly of those games and those rules, basically?
Yeah, so it would mean that there's plenty of reasons why you would want to be religious, and that you could expect other people to have the same religion or act as if they have the same religion with a higher probability. And that would give us, that's what we empirically also see, is that countries with state religions are normally much more religious. In general, a modernized society is going towards secularization because there's a kind of a differentiation going on. So modern societies do not want to have state religions or go towards a situation with more separation, like in Geneva. And they will try to give religious liberty, and so people have all kinds of choices. And once people have all kinds of choices, religion becomes only one choice among many. And that's the religious secular competition. That's what is difficult for religions. So suddenly, pastors will compete with psychotherapists or with life coaches or with all kinds of wellness possibilities, and they have to survive in that market, and that's not so easy.
So it means that with diversified markets, or let's say maybe fields, it means that religion is just one thing among many, and so it diversifies also how people can act, or if they want to take part to the religious game or not.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly the point, yeah. So you have, in earlier societies, you have basically one game with that does most of the things, right? And so religion is a very important part in that. And you have almost no choice of saying that God doesn't exist or that this spirit doesn't exist. That would be putting yourself out of the one game you have. Whereas now we have all kinds of, in modern society, you have all kinds of games that you can choose, and you go through your life and see a game here, a game there, and it's very hard to say which one do you want to take, where do you want to invest your time, and once you're in, you have to accept those rules and you have to play that game, but you could also go out and do something else. And then, of course, religion becomes something often that is close to leisure. You could go and be interested in jazz music, but you could also go to a religious ritual, or do nothing.
Indeed. And so I'm also curious about the domination dynamic, being with the nation state, let's say, on religious practices, for example, or being within the own, like a community or a group, on how this domination dynamic can be seen, understood, researched, and how does it work, basically?
Yeah. So in a social game perspective, we would again say, we would see power not as, there's some theorists who say that power is basically the central concept of social science. Like in Foucault, for example, power, it's all about power. But in social game theory, you would see power as derived from the rules and sanctions, the resources, the representation. So in groups with very strong power, let's take a group like the Ordre du Temple Solaire, the Solar Temple. Well, there you had two leaders that had extreme power, because they had the rules of the game said that basically they could decide the status of the other members. So, and at the blink of an eye, so they could say, well, you are, according to the written rules, so they can say at any moment, well, you are now at the lowest level and you are now at an intermediate level. They also had the resources to do that, so they have a lot of knowledge about the group. And according to the representations and meanings, they are actual reincarnations of extremely important past people. And they are in contact with what is seen as hidden masters. So only they have the link to the supernatural. So with these resources and these meanings, that gives them the total power over the members, which goes very far. So they could, if there were couples in the group, they could say, you have to separate, and you have to, they told people to, other people to go together as couples. They had the possibility to tell people, you can come to the ritual, but you can't today. So they have almost a total power because of those game elements. There's other power techniques that they use then that have been used by all, extreme leaders. I mean, the one of changing the position of members is a classic one. There's one where you put people in competition among each other. There's one, you separate people because you don't want counter power, places where there's counter power. So you shouldn't have that. So there's also things that you do not give, take the resources away from the members. So they should not themselves be alone, for example. So these kinds of things.
Okay. And it makes me think of the part where you talk about norm following and the rationality, so homo sociologicus and homo economicus, and you make a kind of mix of that with the homo ludens.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit more about it? Like, how does it apply, and how do you see this kind of ideal type?
Yes. Yes, so that's one of the basic insights that I thought I had. So if you talk about economics, they have rational choice, homo economicus. They've seen that it's more complicated with experimental work and Kahneman, Tversky, and the framing. But basically, they had classically, neoclassical economics has rationality. They only look at the means and goals, basically. And they do not have much, they don't look a lot at the rules and sanctions. You have institutionalism, but basically. They also don't look much at representations, meanings, culture. Sociologists traditionally look a lot at rules and sanctions. So homo sociologicus, that was Dahrendorf, for example, who wrote on that. People in the symbolic interactionism, like Blumer or Cooley, they talked a lot about culture and about that the social world is reconstructed at every moment. Well, if you look at a simple game, you see that all three elements are there all the time. So I can't have, if I have a game of chess, in every move I use resources to achieve a goal. But I can only do it by following the rules, otherwise the move wouldn't be there. And at the same time, I do it, for example, with the queen. So you have a little figure that is a queen that has some imaginary, it's a world with kings and queens and knights, and you see sort of that kind of world where you're in. So they're all three at the same time important. And at every point, I think that's one of the basic insights. And many anomalies that economists find can actually, I think, be explained in that way. So they say, well, there's a voter's paradox because people go to vote, but they shouldn't, because it's not rational, because I should know that if I vote or not, that one vote doesn't change the outcome. But they don't see that people who vote, they think of themselves as players, and they think that they actually should do this. So culturally, they want to be somebody, a citizen, a responsible citizen, who is somebody who helps this kind of government, which is a good government to them, to exist. If nobody did this, people say, well, then that couldn't work. So it's a good thing if I do it, and I would have a bad feeling if I didn't do it. So there's some people look at themselves and give meaning to their action, and that also is important for what they do. So it's not only the rationality of changing the outcome, but it's also the cultural thing about who am I and how do I want myself to be seen, also to myself. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I think the specific thing about religion is actually that you have those supernatural entities. But otherwise, I think the general power of belief, or I would say shared beliefs, which are representations in my scheme, you find them everywhere. So you have very, very strong beliefs, representations in all kinds of non-religious games where people get extremely agitated once you try to change them or challenge them. How is it possible to now not? I mean, we had when we had the question of there were Muslim children who did not want to give the hand to the teacher in German-speaking Switzerland, and because of beliefs, Muslim, more traditional Muslim views on gender relations, and you can be for that or against that. But it was interesting how people, Swiss people, non-Muslim people, reacted to it, and they were extremely angry at the fact that somebody didn't want to shake hands. Later, we didn't shake hands anymore because of COVID, and people say, well, now that's how we do it now because so you change something in the rules of the game, and which seem to be normal, and people get extremely worked up. There's Garfinkel did those experiments that showed that it only takes a small thing, and people get extremely shaken.
It made me kind of think of the laicity rule, for example, in Geneva as well, mm-hmm. and how, for example, the games of kind of religion and the rules need to also change based on the political position, mm-hmm. And the policies basically, mm-hmm. that are implemented. And I'm wondering, like, how does that change, and how do we abide by the rules, and how do we kind of, are there like also in the theory, are there like alternatives, and like we see?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So in the theory, there's all kinds of. In the book, if once it will be there, there's a chapter on rules, of course, and there's plenty of things interesting to say. So rules, again, are socially constructed. They only exist if we believe in them. If several people will not act in accordance to the rules and nobody sanctions them, the rules disappear. This is why sanctioning is so important. So once somebody doesn't accept the rules, somebody has to sanction, or the person has to repair the rule. Repairing of rules is done by excusing yourself. You say, oh, excuse me, I didn't do this. That means you say, I know the rule exists. Normally I would do this. There was, because of other things, I didn't do it. That's okay then, normally, because we know the rule exists. But rules can disappear quite quickly if people don't accept them. Rules are also all the time in social games fought about. So everybody tries to interpret the rules a bit in their sense. They try to, and the others try to say, oh, no, you haven't done right. You should, this is the rule. So, and of course, all actors in politics try to change the rules in their favor. Gerrymandering in the United States. Every party that is in power tries to change the way we vote so it stays in power, right? And democracy can be seen as one big game that solves that problem of that we have, that once somebody is in power, that person tries to stay in power and tries to make the rules in such a way that, so we try to have, rules that say you can only be president twice, not 3 times. We have checks and balances. All of that is with this general problem in mind of power in games.
Mm-hmm. And how does it apply basically to, for example, in your schema, in your how do I say, like game theory scheme? Yes, exactly. Thank you. So in your game theory scheme, there is also the context, right?
Right.
And this is also related to the outcomes. It's related to everything, basically, every other layer.
Yes.
And there is also the actions of the individual, right? So, for example, let's say we change the context for someone in somewhere where they have less religious freedom, let's say. How is basically everything impacted on? Do you have a specific case that you could like think of these differences of context and how it impacts the way the individual will behave or will have to change the resources and means? And
yes, the environment is extreme, or context is extremely important. And one thing that I find fascinating, one first thing is how the game uses the context to exist in an almost magical way. So if you play rock, paper, scissors, the context is used, the hands are used, and because we're playing the game, this now is not a fist anymore, it's a rock, and this is a paper. It's not a real paper, but in the game it's a paper, and suddenly this is they say a horse. I don't know in English how they. But so you have a little figure that suddenly becomes something from the context becomes something else because of the game, and children will play football, but with a plastic bottle, empty plastic, and suddenly the plastic bottle becomes the football. Of course, the environment context influences games in all kinds of ways. So it might be, for example, that some resource is there or is not there, or some kind of actors that should be there for the game. You don't have enough of them. On the Titanic, when they filled the lifeboats, they had a rule, and the rule was women and children first. But the problem was in the first boats that they filled, they didn't have enough women. So they had a boat, and they should fill it, but there's only 3 women. So what do you do now? And interestingly, then you have to interpret the rule. So on one side of the Titanic, the officer decided to fill up with men. So that's where many men who could then survive. On the other side of the Titanic, the rule means just women and children. So men who were on that side could not survive, right? So that's how the context can influence. Context influences extremely strongly. The religion in general. We see secularization in modernized societies. In my view, that's because in the context we have so much progress that creates technical solutions for life problems. Religions are about solving life problems in a symbolic way. Security and explanation and health and structure for your life. All these things are given by religion. But once in the context, suddenly you have a very efficient biomedicine that really works. And it doesn't work, it hasn't been working, it's the 20th century where it really started working. But then once you have that, religion becomes less important to solve health problems, right? Because it becomes less important, well, you see less religiosity.
To come back on, you talked about symbol, right? And if I'm not mistaken, during your class, you also talked about the fact of seeing the bread as something different. And I thought this example was very interesting. Could you maybe share like how you see this?
Yes, so I always give the example of the Catholic Eucharist, where it is. And you see that in many religions, that in the Eucharist, the priest will say, well, this is the bread, and tell the story of how Jesus broke the bread. And he will hold it up, and then you'll hear a bell. And that is the moment, according to Catholic creed, that the bread is transformed into the body of Christ. And the wine, and again you hear the bell, so you hear when the supernatural comes into the natural world, is transformed into the blood of Jesus. And then the followers will actually eat and drink what is the body and blood of their God. A very strong kind of thing. But the interesting thing from a social game point of view is it's basically the same thing as when I say, well, this is a rock now, and this is a paper, and this is a scissors. So something becomes something else almost magically in the game, right? Only that in religious games, it's a supernatural entity that is alluded to. So this is now something holy. This is now our God. And then, of course, interestingly, theology will start to think about it and will say, well, how is it possible that this is God? You know, this bread, is it really God? In what sense is it God? And there you have the fight between Catholics and Protestants. So the Catholics said, it's really God, and they still say it. And the Protestants will say, well, it's more of a symbol for God, right? Or it should just remind us of that Jesus did something. So you can also, with this fact that you have always in a game also the representations and meanings, you come to very, very important points in real social games, and people have fought wars about that question. You know?
And it makes me think of if you had any religious objects in mind or symbols that have gained or lost significance to a certain group or for certain religion over time.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an example in mind?
So what I was thinking is, for example, I was thinking basically about digital technologies and how they could help, for example, spread or like make a certain object or a certain symbolic known to a wider audience and how it would impact. But I don't know if you have a specific stance on.
Well, they have a digital Jesus now in one of the parishes in the German-speaking Switzerland. So who will talk to? So they made AI read everything that Jesus says in the Bible, and then of course you can converse with Jesus. And but he seems to be not so interesting to people. So, I mean, the people are interested in the experiment, but it doesn't seem to be a Jesus that does so much for people. I'm not yet sure if there's sort of the digital revolution, I mean, the religious field also does those transformations, follows those transformations. It's not at the forefront of those transformations. Not yet quite sure if there's anything new that will, create a revival in religion because of those new possibilities. I haven't really seen that.
Okay, because I've seen you also research about revivals in certain areas, right? Mm-hmm. Is there like a typical reason for revivals to happen?
Yeah, so if you look worldwide, we had the three most important revivals worldwide would be the Islamic revival, political Islam from the 70s on, would be an Orthodox revival from the 90s on, so when the Soviet Union disintegrates, and Pentecostal revival from the start of the 20th century. These are for different reasons. So the Pentecostal revival is certainly because so this kind of Christianity finds that new way of becoming really interesting with rituals that are interesting to many people, especially in poorer parts of the world. The political Islam revival is basically a reactionary movement against secularization from above. So in different countries, the leaders try to force the societies into secularization because they want to be as economically as strong as the West. And this doesn't work, and the populations are really unhappy with that, and find and so this reactionary movement sort of reverses that and says no, now the veiling is important. We want to go back to our religious roots, and we want to counter Israel, for example. And the Orthodox revival is because of the disintegration of the Soviet Union, where in the Eastern countries of post-Soviet countries, the whole society breaks down. So terrible crisis and inflation and everything breaks down. And so the one thing where people can hold on to is a kind of an identity. So this is a nationalist religious identity. So that's why you find now in Russia, for example, that the big upswing of religiosity, religious identity. People say, I'm Russian, I'm Orthodox. It's basically the same thing. I'm very proud of being that. Georgia, the same thing.